Welcome to our podcast. I'm Karin.
And I am Lula Gage. Together, we are the safety collaborators and co-founders of Safety Collaborations.
We help people change the way they think about safety. In fact, we are passionate about it.
Our free podcasts intend to share nuggets of wisdom that will challenge your perspectives, potentially solve a nagging problem, share actions that you can implement, and give you at least one aha moment.
Join us weekly and let's change the way people think about safety together. Now, let's get on with the show.
This week, we thought we would look at a bit of a provocative topic, and we're going to talk about what is the negative impact of the safety board, and is your safety board psychologically safe?
When we talk about the safety board, we're talking about that big board that you see when you walk into a site or drive into a site or up on the rig floor or wherever it is. And, you know, those numbers that are up there, where we really promote the LTI is 0 and all the other different stats. So in principle, the intention is good. Yeah. But I often wonder, and I know that we've talked a lot about this, but what are the negative consequences? Are we measuring and promoting and celebrating the right information?
And that's such an interesting question, because you're right. The intention is good. We're putting these things out there because we want people to see how safe we are keeping everyone, how well we are doing, and that the efforts that we're putting into our systems and processes are working, and they're showing these positive results. And we can go to our potential clients and say, look at this amazing stats according to our man hours and everything else that's there. But when you look at a safety board or you read these statistics and they look amazing, everything's in the green. What are your first thoughts?
What are we not saying? What are we not being honest about? That's usually my first thoughts. And I know we've had, over the years, we've all had various conversations with various people, and I'm not convinced that people actually really believe them anyway. If I think of an incident some time ago now, we were actually celebrating 1,000 man hours without LTI. Now, that's phenomenal. However, at the very same time, there was a man in hospital with his thumb tip chopped off. But because we hadn't sent him home to his home country, it didn't have to be recorded as a lost time incident. Because, in fact, they brought him back to site under restricted work conditions.
Wow.
Right. So as we were having this enormous barbecue, which was fantastic, and there was a lot of celebration, it was an interesting conversations with various people. Because you would have some, the more cynical, we might say, going, this is all BS, blah, blah, blah. And I remember at the time thinking, yeah, it may be. But when we think about what's the intention, and coming back to that statement of the intention is good, there were a lot of people there that felt like they wanted to celebrate something. Or, I think there was an underlying reason for the celebration. It wasn't just about the LTI, but that was the tool, that 1,000 man hours. It was the tool, I suppose, to get people together. So there was an opportunity there. So I remember at the time thinking, yes, I agree with the cynics, and the cynical side of me was with them. But the other side, I had to and a little bit of our job role in some ways, to say, okay, well, let's see the positive in this, all right? And the positive is that we were inspiring people to, feel good about that.
Do you not sometimes think that it's also that link to when are these statistics put to a bonus or a team incentive? And on the project I've been working on recently, there have been a few people commenting and saying, Well, normally for LTI-free days or incident-free day, whatever the case is, however it gets worded, there's some kind of reward. So there's either a celebration or there's a personal bonus or a team bonus or something. And they've asked me, can I push to have this included? Because they want some kind of bonus for this. And when I say, no, I'm not going to push for this to be included, they look at me and they're like, but why not? And I said, because my concern is what happens with the unintended consequences. Because what we want is we want people to be comfortable to speak up and say something went wrong. We want them to be able to go to the medic and be honest and say, listen, I didn't just slightly hurt myself, I actually really hurt myself and I'm pretty damn sore, and not cover it up. And we want to be able to learn from these that we can improve the system overall. So when we are rewarding these kind of things, sometimes the unintended consequence is that we keep quiet because, excuse the language, but I don't want to be the asshole to mess up the stats.
Absolutely. And I'm going to share another story, and it's a very personal one, because it was me who was the asshole that didn't want to mess up the stats.
Yeah.
And again, I was working on a rig. We'd been there for months, and it was a real struggle. And of course, the main measurement was, can we go for X amount of days without some sort of LTI, minor, whatever, yeah?
Like a first aid case.
In that case, it was even minor incident. It didn't even necessarily become an LTI. Yeah, it could be first aid case, whatever, right? And of course, it was really difficult. It was, a lot of people who were very unfamiliar with the environment at the time. They were very inexperienced, not dissimilar to the project that we're on right now. And of course, we'd finally, and every day at the pre-tower meeting, we would rock up and we'd say, okay, this is where we're at today, blah, blah, blah. Well, this particular time I could actually say, woohoo, 20 days without, and funny, I just remembered the number, 20 days without some sort of event, yeah? 20 days, well done, everybody, really rah-rahed it up, G'd it up, did whatever. And this is where I'll really go into, was that psychologically safe, right? Because about half an hour after that meeting, and everybody goes about their business, including myself, I was on my way down to the office that I was working out of on the rig, and wanted a cup of tea. So of course I had my computer with me, and I thought, I'll just grab a cup of hot water because the tea bags were in the office and I had to walk down a flight of stairs. So of course, making sure that I had my hand on the rail, I had balanced this cup of hot water, and to be fair, back then I don't think we really worried too much about covering them, right? So it was a while ago. Right? It wouldn't even happen now. Or no, I tell a fib. Actually, we did have a cup, the cover fell off when it fell, because inevitably that's what happened. And funny, I got almost to the second last step, and that's when it slipped. And it didn't slip forward, it slipped backwards onto me.
Ouch.
So I actually burnt my left wrist. Right? And it got caught underneath my watch band as well.
Of course it would. Yes.
So, right, hello. So my first reaction was, oh shit. My second reaction was to, okay, can we clean up the mess on the floor? Right? To get rid of the mess and the evidence as quickly as possible. So then I very calmly walked to the office, put my computer and everything down, and then I went to visit the medic, who was a very good pal, and I closed the door because it was right next door to the company man's office. And I said, X name, I won't say the name, of course, not that it would make any difference right now. I've just burnt myself and I don't want anyone to know. So probably to this day, he and I, apart from everybody I'm just sharing this with now, were the only persons that knew that had happened. And it was burnt. I had to put my watch on the other wrist. I had to put a burn cover on my wrist.
Oh, wow.
And I made sure that my coveralls, my arms on my coveralls rolled down the whole time, which was difficult. Not that was okay, but was when I was indoors, it was more challenging because it was in a hot country. And of course, we only wore short sleeve shirts. So it was really interesting. And I remember distinctly somebody saying to me at one point, "Oh, you're wearing your watch on the other wrist." No, yeah, just thought I'd do something different, change my habits.
Oh, wow.
I did not. And why did I do that? Now, I was a safety observer on board, right? I mean, I was the safety coach. We didn't call ourselves that at the time, but right. But why did I do that? I didn't want to, I was embarrassed. That was the first thing. And two, I didn't have the heart to break that 20-day record for everybody else on board. I couldn't do it to them. And that has plagued me for years, actually, because who else does that happen to? And I'm not afraid to say I've made a mistake. That has never been my issue. Right? I'm always the first to put up my hand to say, but I messed up here. Right? But that was more about not wanting to disappoint and to break the hard work that, in theory, everybody else had done. Right? So I've often asked this question, what is the psychological safety around those boards? What are we not telling the truth about? Or it's not even the truth, actually, just not sharing.
What are we just not? That's the exact word I was going to use. I was going to say, what are we not sharing, or we're not sharing outside of a very intimate group?
Absolutely.
Because we will often share it within an intimate group, but that's where it stays.
Absolutely.
And, we say hindsight is the most amazing thing. So if you could go back, would you have done anything differently?
Oh, that's a dangerously good question. Because I don't want to break the heart of all those people, I'm not sure I would have. I'm not sure, actually.
And that often is the hard reality. And it's the hard reality that everyone else is dealing with today. And
that's why I now share it more publicly. If you think about in the scheme of incidents and things, and, it might even seem a little benign, but it's this that is at the core of psychological safety. It's this stuff that's at the core of a good, healthy safety culture.
Are we feeling safe to share?
Absolutely.
And so often we're not, and sometimes we're pressured into not sharing.
Yeah.
Whether it's because of history, the way things have always been done around here. I mean, I've had a couple of examples, and some horrifying stories have been shared with me about other projects that I haven't been on. The lighter version of one of the stories recently was, it was a minor first aid case, and I was sitting having a meal with some of the team, and they were like, why do people report those small things? I've got my own pack of painkillers and first aid, like little mini kit Band-Aids and what have you in my cabin. If I do something small like that, I just keep quiet and get on with it. I mean, what is it with this new generation that they have to show everything? And when I challenged that statement and I said, well, maybe it's because it's actually the right way to do things, and that, we can learn and we can, see how we can improve the system. Sometimes we just do something that's just plain silly and not everybody needs to know about it. How do you respond to that? You kind of go, well, let me see your hands. Is there anything else that you're hiding from me?
Absolutely.
But on the other side of it, you kind of go, well, you can't force that perception to change either, because people need to see evidence of not being ridiculed, not being, that so sure you've seen that meme of the dog that's pulling a funny expression that says, when your incident is mentioned in the safety meeting the next day, or you're the reason for the safety meeting the next day, like awkward.
Very. Yeah.
So that's kind of like one of the lighter examples. There were also a couple of more concerning examples. Mm-hmm. And one of them was where, one of the guys slipped and hit himself with a pinch bar. And I found out about it the next morning and from the safety guy, and he was like, this guy was just so embarrassed. He said, and the medic was doing his exam on him and what have you, and he kept saying, I'm fine, it's just a scratch, it's just a scratch. They were like, and he was like, no, I'm fine. It's no big deal. Later in the day, when the shift change came on and I was speaking to someone else, they were like, that guy knocked himself out, like as in, like really hurt himself. And I'm like, that's not what I've been told. And when I went and spoke to him later, he was like, no, I'm okay. I'm like, but dude, you can hardly talk. We need to get you back to the medic. No, I'm fine. I don't need to go to the medic. I'm fine. And can't force the person to go. But I was really concerned about him. And I had that conversation with a few people. I was like, look, I can't force the issue. However, where is that coming from? Because that's not the environment that we've tried to create here. So it's coming from past experience. And Absolutely. It's something I think we need to be very conscious of. People are bringing their past experience into a situation and bringing that sense of, I can't be vulnerable, I can't share, I need to downplay what's going on because in the past I've seen people who just haven't been invited back. They get an NRB, not required back, because they hurt themselves. And it's how do we start influencing that in a more positive way, that it's not about you've broken the safety stats. It's not about that you're embarrassed, but it's about how do we help you make sure that you're okay, and then how do we fix the system and improve the system to see, is there a way that we can reduce the likelihood of that happening again?
Exactly. When we talk about psychological safety, it's at the heart of that conversation. It really is. And I know people out there are probably thinking, there's lots of stuff around that, but there is some real evidence now, bodies of evidence, and why there is a new, it's not actually so new, but the ISO 45003, which talks about not just the physical aspects, but actually the mental wellness, but also how we allow people to show up, to speak up. And, we talk a lot about the 4 stages of psychological safety, and it's not linear. It does happen in, different degrees for different people. But this part of not being able to speak up is also about our growth. Are we allowed to grow, to learn, and feel safe where we aren't embarrassed or punished, as you just said? People, are they the fear of losing their job? Is it the fear of, I can't afford to lose this job because I've got to feed my family? There's so many aspects to why people won't speak up. So the more that, I think we both agree that the more that we can help organisations and teams to make it safe for people to share that, because then there's this old bit about, personal sharing and how much do you share and not share, and all of that comes into this equation, if you like.
And just on that,
so I think sorry, go for it. Yeah.
No, just on the the learning side, what just suddenly popped up in my mind was a big part of the conversations that we have as coaches and holding people accountable is also creating that space to allow people to unlearn and relearn.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that is becoming a really important skill and view in the working environment. Just because things have been done this way or just because we've had an experience doesn't mean that we can't unlearn and relearn a different way of doing things. Creating a different conversation, having a different accountability. And maybe that's part of the conversation of how do we change this perception around not wanting to be the one to break the safety stats, but wanting to rather say, well, how do we learn how to do things better? And, it reminds me of that conversation that you've recently had with one of our clients about maybe changing the focus to good catches. And maybe you want to share a little bit more about, what is that?
So what they've started doing, and they actually do record these now, so they're trying to, and one thing I think we need to be careful, be clear about, we're not saying that we shouldn't be recording LTIs or recording all of these incidents, because there are learning opportunities as much as anything. But does it need to be do they need to be the elements that are broadcast, right, to the greater community? So instead of saying, okay, we've had X amount of days, and this is a work in progress because there's resistance to this, as you can imagine. So the idea behind what the client's doing is saying, right, well, let's measure the good catches and let's report those publicly. Let's start shifting the narrative around the what I call what we're calling the safety board phenomena, and taking that a step further. It's not just even recording the good catches, but maybe going a step further and actually saying safety is about conversations. So let's talk about the conversations around safety. Let's ignore all the other stuff and just focus on the conversations that we need to have, whether they're, to use the phrase, in the green or the red, right? So the green being what do we measure, what's measuring that makes everything look good, and the red being what are we not measuring or not reporting because we don't want to break what looks good. And we need to focus more on that element. So the conversation is around how do we build into the program that we're working on that it's all about the conversations that we have and allow people to have in that safe space. And I think something else, coming back to something you said a little bit earlier, what's the other element of being human beings is we don't want to show vulnerability. And of course, the more that we open up and the more that we share about what we think should have happened or shouldn't have happened, the more vulnerable we are. So a really interesting exercise that that I'm actually doing with some leaders is an activity around vulnerability. And of course, the more you challenge the system, the more that you open up, the more vulnerable you actually are. And so how do we create that space to reduce that? So thinking about the conversations, etc.
And it's such a lovely space to be in, to be having those very different conversations, especially around safety and in the safety world. But I think when you mention the word vulnerable or vulnerability, it's still incredibly scary for a lot of people,
Terrifying.
Terrifying. And we're not talking about that we're all going to hold hands and we're going to hug each other and lean on each other's shoulders and, have a little cry in the corner. And it's like, it's okay. That's not what vulnerability in this space looks like. No. But it is around being honest. It's around having the sometimes hard conversations. It's around feeling safe that your opinion counts and will be heard, and that when you disagree with something, you can challenge and you're not going to be judged or belittled or put down. And vulnerability, it's not about, like I said, getting all particularly warm and fuzzy, but it's about being open and honest and having the right conversations.
And feeling safe to do so. And I'm afraid to say that does start with leadership. So if the leadership or whoever's leading the team, whatever the title, it starts with there. So vulnerability actually is a very 21st century or 22nd century, whichever one we're in, leadership skill. And it's a very high requirement, so as is curiosity and a few others, but later conversations. So one of the first steps is helping people to understand what that even means. So until you understand your own vulnerability, how can we help others, and how can we start shifting that narrative, changing that narrative around what good safety looks like and what is it based on?
And it brings it back to that trust, that I can trust that my words are going to be safe with you.
Mm.
And sometimes it starts in the smaller conversations. And I've had that quite a few times, especially where people are bringing in past experience from other places where they've had a really negative experience about opening up or speaking up about some potentially difficult conversations. And being who we are and what we do, people often open up a lot more than they imagined that they would.
Yeah.
And there've been a couple of times where I've had some really blunt but honest conversations where people have been, this, and this. And then like an hour after the conversation, I get the WhatsApp message, "You're not going to share this with anybody, are you?" And I'm like, have I shared anything that we've spoken about with anyone without your permission?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. This is your conversation to have with the people you need to have it. Mm. But I'm here to give you the space to process how you would like to have that conversation with the right people. But it's not my place to share your story.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things about having someone, who is in that position in these high hazard places and industries, is that it gives people the space to learn what is that like, but also give them the space to figure out how far they're willing to try and test those boundaries to see what the reaction is that comes back, and whether they can trust that they can go the next step, or do they retreat back to where they were.
I think a term here, which comes out of a program I was running the other day, which is Psychological Safety for Leaders, which is what I'm running for an organisation. And one of the guys said, "What I've learned from today, that Rome isn't built in a day. We need to take one step at a time. And, sometimes we'll go forward a step, or we might take 2 steps backwards, but we've got to keep trying."
I love that.
I think overall,
yeah,
although that was very cool.
Very.
There were a couple of other good words too, but that one sort of stood out, and it's interesting because a few people were saying, "So, well, how do you know that you've got there?" And I don't know that you do, but you got to just keep trying.
Well, it's the same as my question to you earlier. Well, what's the solution? I don't think there is a single solution.
I don't think there is either. I think there's, it's looking at your toolkit of stuff that you can work with, whether it's, changing the narrative, I think, is important. And I also feel that this, and if I come right back to, the safety board issue or the LTI issue, it's an industry challenge. So the narrative has to change in the industry. And as long as safety stats, in brackets lagging indicators such as LTIs, are used, and I'm going to say as a sales tool, it will be difficult to change. Mm-hmm. Because the first thing that, any operator wants to know, well, what's your safety statistics? Well, we've had 25 really good conversations last week. Can see that going down a treat, right? Versus, we've got 1,000, So, I think there's some challenges there. So there's a whole mindset shift, So, and I think the industry, by and large, is starting to shift a little bit. There's a lot of conversations around this, and there's lots of industry leaders that are starting to talk about this out there. But it's going to take some time,
It is. And I must say, I would love to hear people's opinions and invite ideas from the audience, because you might be sitting on this amazing nugget that could have such an impact. So don't sit on it. If something is coming to mind and sparking it, share it. Let's get that idea out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can share it with us if you like on our LinkedIn page. It's probably the best place, actually.
Yep.
Or, go either one of us and let us know, that you were listening to this podcast and this was the sparky idea that I had. go for
Absolutely.
it.
Don't be embarrassed to share it. We will embrace your idea.
Absolutely. So that leads us to wrapping this up on we've mentioned this word a couple of times during the conversation today. And so today's emotional gem is embarrassment. So the story behind the emotion embarrassment is that I don't want others to know what I have done. Our impulse, which is what drives us to action, and that's actually what emotions do for us, is to hide what I have done or not done. And so therefore its purpose keeps us from looking awkward or incompetent. So embarrassment literally means to block. When we are in embarrassment, our emotional predisposition, what drives us to act, is to hide from others because of something we feel we have not done well or should not have done at all. Lots of shoulds in there. They always get us into trouble. So embarrassment contains an aspect of what we call self-judgment, in that we believe we should have been doing it this way or we shouldn't have done it that way, whatever the case may be. If we are embarrassed to speak, for example, a foreign language or play an instrument in public, it may be because we have expectations that are higher than our competencies, which is interesting. If I think back to my incident, it was my expectations, I guess, that I didn't want to share either. So it may also have something to do with others' expectations, but it's largely our own, So one thing that embarrassment can show us is what things in life we aspire to be better at. So that's just in general. But let's think back to the safety board. The board's intention is to inspire us to be better. However, if people do not speak up because they may be embarrassed about something they feel they should have or should not have done, then where does that leave the intention of the safety board? So the question here for your pondering is, does your safety culture inspire people enough to overcome their embarrassment, or in brackets shame or guilt, because they are very similar feeling emotions, although they have different purposes, and feel safe enough to speak up when things don't go right? That's a wrap for today. Thank you for joining us today. It's always lovely to have these conversations that matter. We'll be delighted if you share this podcast and hit the subscribe button on your preferred podcast platforms such as Apple or Spotify, etc. Connect with us via our website, www.safetycollaborations.com, where you will find the show notes for today's episode. Email us at hello@safetycollaborations.com. We'd be delighted to hear from you. We are easy to find on LinkedIn. Just look out for either Nuala Gage or Karin and follow our company page, Safety Collaborations. Until next week, stay safe and stay well.